Welcome to the FemTech Delights podcast. I'm Sefi Edaman, and I'm thrilled to share my passion for FemTech with you. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our podcast. And with us today, we have a very special guest, Nilian Marufu, and she is a neuromarketing and psychological branding strategist. How are you today, Nilian?
I'm good, thank you. And thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited. Yeah,
I'm also excited, always excited to talk to people in the FemTech industry and from different perspectives, different angles.
Yeah.
And I mean, until now, I interviewed people who are leading companies with products or services. It's the first time I'm actually interviewing someone from the marketing kind of perspective. We're kind of colleagues. We both work in the marketing space. So each one of us has a different kind of perspective. So I'm going to just start with asking you, can you tell us about your journey into neuromarketing and why you chose to specialize in the women's health sector?
Definitely. So my journey is a long one, but I'll try to shorten it as much as I can. So I got into neuromarketing mainly for myself. When I was in college, I did psychology. I took psychological classes, and part of my semester, I did organizational behavior. So I've always been interested in psychology and cognitive behavioral studies. So when I started my marketing business, I was really struggling to put it out there. So I decided to change the approach and adapt, the psychological fundamentals of marketing into my business. And surprisingly, it worked. I didn't actually think it was going to work, but it did. So when I realized this is such a powerful skill or expertise to have, I started deciding which field I wanted to be in. At first, I was mostly targeting SaaS businesses. And then after that, I decided to be in mental health because I've always been also a huge advocate of mental health and wellness, but I really didn't feel quite at home. Then I just kind of came across an article, FemTech, the term FemTech. I was like, that is interesting. I've never heard of anything like that because I knew of the tech part because we have financial tech, businesses, health tech, but I didn't know what the FemTech part was all about. So I read into it, and it really was intriguing because I could relate to it because as a woman, we all have health issues that we're dealing with. So I'm looking at these products and brands that are making resources and solutions to make them more accessible, more flexible to fit into an ordinary woman's day-to-day lifestyle, regardless of how busy you are or your financial budget. So it was very interesting to me, and I just decided there and then that's the field I wanted to work in, and I decided to stay.
That's great. I mean, many people still don't know what FemTech is, and that's the purpose of one of the purposes of this show is to tell people what FemTech is. Like, why do we need FemTech? So this brings me to the next question: is when creating a brand identity for a women's health company, what are the key elements you prioritize?
So the key elements that I prioritize is to look outside the brand itself, to focus mainly on the audience. So when we notice in marketing, mainly people take the approach of a business approach. Grow my business at this revenue. What strategies can I use to grow my business? But we forget about the audience because to make that money, you need to sell to people, and the people are the audience. So my key element is always to understand the audience. So I need to understand the audience entire. I know I say this a lot, but cognitive behavior. What are their emotional triggers? What are their past experiences with a similar brand or similar sector? So if we're looking into health, what kind of experiences they have in the past that have made them maybe trigger a negative emotion of isolating or having some form of resentment towards healthcare, and having those insights help me to align the brands, or rather the brands that I am working with the right key message that does not trigger the same negative emotion, because we are trying not to trigger that fight or flight response within the audience. It's also important to know the tone of voice that we're going to approach with. So if we look into the healthcare system, there's so much resistance and resentment, like I said, with the healthcare system, because women feel like they have not been heard and not being addressed. as much as they want to. So they are choosing to disassociate with healthcare entirely. So when it comes to tone of voice, identifying, visualization, and positioning, I need to take an approach that can kind of separate us from the clinical approach that women are used to and present them into a newer approach that is more community oriented, a safer space for them to talk about their emotions and probably the situations that they might be going through without that hesitation of, oh, am I going to be heard, or am I going to be prescribed the same solutions and, like the whole one shoe fits all type of an approach. So that's another key element I look into.
Special about women is, women have their cycles. So it's like, when they have their periods, before they get pregnant, while they're pregnant, after they get pregnant. I mean, they have women like change physically during their lifetime. And until now, it's like, women were like just one category. But actually within women, there are many categories, right? There are many categories, which we have to really, that's what you're saying, kind of look into what they're going through during that period of time. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like what you're saying is very important. So understanding. So one of the key things that I do with a client is called an emotional analysis. So basically with an emotional analysis, you tell me what your brand is about, and then I go onto the internet, then I crawl the internet. So it's a very manual thing, but it's a very important thing, because when you're going through social media in certain groups using certain keywords, let's say for menopause, I go on Reddit, I type in menopause, and I read articles and women have been talking about, collect that data, and I do sentimental analysis. You can start pinpointing their primary emotions and secondary emotions. And I use that to create what I call an audience emotional segmentation, where we have other people creating buyer personas. Like I'm targeting someone age 50, works in corporate. I change the narrative to an emotional segmentation, because this means that we have this broader audience group in different emotional segmentations. So segment A needs a more empathetic tone to get the message across. And then we have segment B, these are advocates. So they need more of a go-getter tone of voice, like we are implementing strategies. So if you were going to go with the message of, let's get the change, let's make the change happen, to someone who's kind of on the shyer side, they haven't even learned to accept themselves, the message kind of dilutes. So understanding all these segments, all these emotional triggers and behaviors within the audience, it genuinely changes the narrative, right, of how you market and how you present your brand in general. Yeah.
Well, that's super, super important, super interesting. So how do you help brands navigate sensitive topics such as fertility, menopause, or mental health without alienating or overwhelming the audience? Because some of these topics are topics we don't like to talk about. We're kind of, let's not talk about it. So how do you kind of overcome that?
Yeah, so that one is a very important one, because we have so many amazing brands out there, and the reason why they're struggling to find their stand is all in the messaging. So when it comes to sensitivity, I normally take a storytelling approach. So my storytelling approach is in multiple sectors, but commonly I like to tell the story of the founder. What's the reason behind why you started this brand?
Yeah, there's always a story. There's always a story,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, exactly. Is it you or someone else, who has suffered from something similar? We need the story to be told. But at the same time, we don't want you to overshare too much to the point where the audience are like, oh my gosh, that is way too much. I don't want to, because as much as we share information, we have to filter it, because we're not trying not to be cringe per se, but to make someone else uncomfortable. Like, okay, you're now oversharing for no apparent reason. So within your story, I always ask my client, what is your objective of sharing that story? And within that story, what key elements of your story that align with your reasoning for sharing? If you have identified those key elements, delete everything, because it's unnecessary. Just share the key components of your story. So you realize within one story, you can share it 1,000 times and still make a difference. And we also use storytelling approach from past clients who have had the same situation. We like to tell those stories a lot because they're very empowering, because this is the same person who can relate to the reader because they have gone through the same issue, the same problems, and they have found resources and solutions to help them. So it's an interesting way of educating without just saying, if you have pelvic floor, you're going to basically have leakage all throughout your entire life. It's going to cause bodily odor. It's, you see where I'm coming from, but instead you say, there's a mother of two, she just gave birth and she was feeling uncomfortable with her body, but we introduced these products for her to give her back that confidence in herself, to feel like she is in control with the body. It kind of changes the narrative. So when it comes to sensitive topics, it's all in the education with the right tone. We're not trying to be aggressive. We try not to be passive, but purposefully educate with the purpose of building a community and inviting more women that are struggling with a certain issue into the space that we're trying to build.
It seems like you're very sensitive. The way you told the story is like looking at the woman and being very sensitive, and not just too pushy or too aggressive, but just listening and being sensitive to the woman. Yeah.
Yeah, because like the field of FemTech itself, it's I'll say health in general, it's a sensitive topic.
Mm-hmm.
So it needs to be met with empathy, and you really need to put yourself into the other person's shoes and say, I understand. I'm not here to make money. I'm not here to make a profit from you. I'm here to actually help you so that you can have the resources that you need. So it takes the approach of, when it comes to other industries, like probably e-commerce, where you sell makeup, sometimes it's very aggressive. Look beautiful, look pretty,
right.
Be the best about it. But when we're talking about someone going through postpartum, you can't say, oh, come on, get up and put makeup and feel pretty. Oh my gosh, that's very insensitive.
Right.
We want them to fit into the space that we are trying to educate them. It's like teaching a child to walk. Don't just push them, is it?
Right.
Step by step, you guide them to the solution you're trying to sell. So that is the same concept. Our audience, we're literally bringing them back up gently and then giving them the resources until they finally get to the solution that they need. Yeah.
That's great. That's very important. So can you walk us through your process for developing a neuromarketing strategy for women's health brand? Like what are the stages?
Oh, I love this one. So basically the stages, obviously, it starts with knowing my client. We always say, when you're working with a client, I have this thing I call intuition. When I meet a client, I can know if this is the brand that I really want to work with, because it probably aligns with my values. But even when I know that, I still need to know them. So we go through a lot of meetings just talking, and the more they talk to me and open up to me, the more I get to know them, what their brand stands for, and the more I can adjust myself as well, so that I can be able to fully address the company's vision, missions, and aspiration. Those are very important. So I'll say definitely understanding my client and their audience is top priority, because at the end of the day, even though I'm marketing to their audience, they still need to be compensated, right, to align their brand to their audience. So knowing my audience, my clients, and then knowing their audience is always number one key. And the second part, depending on what the client needs. So we could either go with an emotional analysis that I mentioned earlier. We do an emotional analysis, kind of just get a deeper understanding. So emotional analysis is targeted to have an ideal of your audience emotional landscape. Like right now, what is Sarah feeling? What is the emotional landscape? And what could those emotions cause her to do on your behavioral impact? Like what is the behavioral impact? Or we could choose to do a consumer insight research. So this is designing a survey, distributing the survey, having women volunteer within the chosen subject that we're trying to get more insight into. So, for example, the previous one that I did, we were trying to understand the perspective of women towards the current healthcare system when it comes to hormonal imbalances. So that helped us to kind of get real-time data. So it's very quantitative, it's very qualitative at the same time. So it's not biased. So these women are really telling you the raw details of what they want. They're also telling you like the solutions that they're looking for. So it just clears everything up, doesn't it? So you have a clear idea of what your marketing strategy is supposed to be. So everything else you don't have to do. So these researches in the beginning are very important to me.
It's, by the way, probably for some women, it's the first time someone is asking them these questions. Probably for most of them, no one ever asked them these questions before. So it's probably an eye opener. Wow, you're asking me these questions. Wow, you care. Yes.
Exactly. And we were even noticing during that entire research that it was aligning with emotional analysis, but because the emotional analysis was data that was taken from the internet, where women were not really fully comfortable to tell you the raw details. There were a lot of things that were, let's say 30% of the 100% of the survey that we did, the information was left out. So when we did the survey, it was like an aha moment, like, oh, so they don't like this. We noticed, like, for example, surprise, surprise, most women didn't even like AI. They don't like it because they feel like AI is not going to be too personalized. Whereas the approach that we're taking with the company is to introduce AI into our medical practices. So doing this research was such a huge highlight that even if in the future we do decide to go with the AI approach, how can we address it in a way that is now acceptable to women? So it's very important data. So with all that emotional analysis and research, to answer your question, it saves me time, a lot of time. Now I don't have to focus on strategic things that are not important because women don't want them anymore. We know exactly what they need. So now we strategize my entire research based on their emotion, behavioral analysis and patterns and buying behavior. And then I go on and develop now the brand for my clients. So within the branding, we're doing tone of voice, we do a consumer analysis, competitive analysis to also understand like what are the marketing gaps. Those are very important.
Right.
We do tone of voice, messaging, different archetypes that they can use for their branding. So it's basically like one of the projects that I was working on, she said, you developed the brand psychology. So I make the brain of my client's brand because it's very important to me that during this entire process, I don't want the brand to sound like a product or a service. I want it to sound like a human being. I want it to sound like another girl going through the same process, reaching out to another girl, going through the same processes and issues, because it builds familiarity between, because people have this response to things they don't like or know, they kind of distance. But when we create something familiar to the audience, it becomes easy for the marketing message to come across or to take it across to the audience. So then we go from building the brand, then we go to visual branding. We start developing your brand's visuals, the packaging. If there's a packaging that needs to be done, if it's the website design, the nitty-gritty, we design that. And when we are done with that, we also give you an emotional palette of your brand. So an emotional palette is like a guideline that just helps you to make sure that you are still using the right emotional triggers. You're not stepping outside the boundaries because, like I said, emotional marketing or psychological marketing, it's a few that most people don't know about. So there are quite a lot of things that you have to familiarize yourself with. So these guides, they help for my clients that just want to take the branding that I've done and they just want to implement it on their own. These resources help them to make sure that they are still following the right pathway to track their consumer journey without, overwhelming themselves. Then I also, as part of my strategy, you also get a branding document for your storytelling. So how to tell your brand or origin story to either target your customers or investors. We do a lot of those with the investors part, like how do I say my pitch?
Right.
Like I get so many, like they have these bold ideas, so much amazing information, and I'm like, but you can't say all of that in 2 hours to someone who can 15 minutes. So how can we break down this information into bite-sized, friendly information, but still very informative? So we work on those as well. How to present your brand the right way in the to your audience, to your investors. We also do storytelling approaches, like I mentioned, how to tell your consumer stories, testimonials, or how to use storytelling in your content. So I call it the brand storyboarding. So now I think we're at phase 6. So phase 1 is emotional analysis, then consumer behavior, which will be 2, research. Then the third one is building and developing the brand. The fourth will be visual developing. And then the fifth is this storyboarding. And the last part will be for my clients who want to continue and proceed with me. We go now into the marketing strategy.
I see.
So for some clients,
the whole process before the marketing strategy, that's it's so important that you're saying this, because people can think, okay, let's sit down and just do a marketing strategy, but there are all these stages before marketing strategy that you need to do before you can even think of a marketing strategy. It's so important that you think this. Yeah. Great.
So because I notice it a lot that people just shoot into branding. Like, oh, I like the color yellow. Yellow is so pretty. And then I'm like, by your audience, they are people of past trauma, they have PTSD, maybe a little bit of green or turquoise will be nice because these are nurturing colors. Yellow is too bright, energetic, it's ecstatic, it's so out there, it's not the right color. So when you start by knowing your audience, what they're looking for, everything else will just fall in line. Everything else will just perfectly fall in line. So it's very important. And yeah, then the last stage will be marketing strategies, developing your content calendar. Now it's like social media management, or rather I call it brand management, and just managing your brand, basically. So it's a long process.
Wow. It's so important that you're saying this. People need to slow down a little bit and just kind of think about all these stages before they just they post on social media. So yeah, totally agree with you. How do you utilize cognitive behavior studies to refine marketing campaigns for women's health products?
Oh yeah. So when it comes to cognitive biases, it's another interesting part as well that is very important, because it kind of clarifies how people consume content, and then from the entire consumer MIP journey, like from the moment you introduce the brand, consuming your content, and then to the purchasing part. So we know, like through past experiences, people have different cognitive dissonances and biases. Some they know, like for example, I could give you in the healthcare system, let's say someone is trying to promote supplements as a way of combating mental health, right? Most people that I know of, for example, ethical groups, they could say, oh, herbs don't work, right? They don't work at all. That is a cognitive dissonance. That is the truth that they believe. So understanding how different races consume content and what they believe to be right or not to be right is important in the way you present your message. So if you were going to go against what they truly believe, most people will say the truth that I believe is the truth. What you're saying is wrong, so I'm choosing not to follow you anymore, and I'm going to look for a brand that stands with what I believe. So when you have these cognitive dissonances in place, it's now important to say, how can I now educate this person the right way to dilute that cognitive dissonance? So in this similar example, we can use testimonials. Hannah was struggling with insomnia, which was triggering her anxiety, but we gave her a dose of 500 milligrams of maybe turmeric that she should take every night. And we tracked on paper from the moment that she started taking supplements, and we were tracking her sleeping patterns. And according to the data, her sleeping pattern has increased by 10%. That is now challenging the consumer's cognitive dissonance, because now they're saying like, oh my gosh, research is actually showing me that this actually worked, and it's neutralized it, and they're like, okay, you know what, maybe I'll try it. So it's not from a perspective of, no, what you believe as a consumer is wrong, what I'm saying is right, but it's saying what you believe is true. But here is also another, study that could challenge what you believe in. So it's important to understand those cognitive dissonances or biases or systems, because they help us to know exactly what kind of information should we be presenting to you, so that it can be helpful for the consumer to consume knowledge.
That's also very important, very interesting, and very important. So how do you see the future of marketing for women's health evolving with the integration of neuroscience?
I see it very expensive, to be honest. Past work that I've done, I've noticed like when we build communities using neuroscience, it has been very helpful. We have been seeing a growth in communities. So it's a sign that this is the right path that we need to be, because neuroscience is not just, I know like it's intimidating, right? And you hear like, oh, neuromarketing and psychological branding. You're like, oh my gosh, like it's a big word. But in a nutshell, it just means to view another person as a person rather than a product. To take the time to understand your audience as a human being rather than just a means of making profit. So when you take that approach, it changes the entire narrative that we know of when it comes to marketing, right? Like, let's just put our keeps in there. Let's see how much we want to make this month, but rather, how many women do we want to change their lives? How many lives do you want to change this year? It makes you want to be more for your clients. So there is so much growth for FemTech in general, and especially for this field, which is so emotional. Like, health and wellness is a very emotional field. Whether you want to take it from a perspective of someone going through cancer, someone going through PTSD, someone going through women's health issues, or someone going through whatever health issue they may be going through, it's a very emotional field. So empathy is very important. And when you learn to talk to people on the same emotional level, it literally changes everything. Yeah. So there is so much growth in the field, I believe.
So thank you very much, Nilian. It was really fascinating the way you have a very systematic approach to marketing and FemTech, which is great. I think many people can learn a lot about you. We'll also provide in the podcast the link to your website and to your social media platforms. And thank you very much for being my guest today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this. Yeah.